Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator with the Higher Education Center. And I want to welcome you all today to the second session in our Spring Learning Collaborative series. This session is titled The Recovery Landscape, Milestones, Current Trends, and Future Directions, featuring Ahmed Hosni and Sarah Ann Anstine. Before we get started with today's content, I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides I'd like to share with everybody. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome your questions at any time throughout the live session for our presenters, but we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. We do have the chat enabled, so please feel free to introduce yourselves and where you're joining us from, along with any resources and reflections on the presented content. But again, we do just kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature for those specific questions. Additionally, we have captioning enabled for today's session, and you should be able to turn that on through your bottom dashboard. If you have any issues getting that set up, please just send me a message and I will try my best to walk you through that process. We also encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. Additionally, this session is approved for 1 hour of entry-level contact hour for CHES and MCHES. In order to receive the credit, you must attend the entire live session. No partial credit will be provided. And additionally, you must attend the live session to receive credit. We are unable to provide credit for just watching the recording. In order to meet the requirements, again, you must attend the entire live session as well as complete the evaluation in its entirety. The evaluation should open in a new tab at the end of the session, but if it doesn't, you are able to locate all of the evaluations from today's series in the Scarlet Canvas course. And you can expect to receive your CHES MCHES certificate within 30 days from the live event. We also have a couple of upcoming events I would like to share with everybody. Our next water cooler chat will be focusing on becoming professionally developed and will be taking place on May 13th. Our next webinar will be taking place the next day on May 14th and is titled Preventing Collegiate Impaired Road Use, a Holistic and Student Inclusive Approach. And we also have the 2025 National Meeting taking place here in Columbus, Ohio, October 21st through the 23rd, and there will be a simultaneous virtual offering running at the same time. Registration is now open with early bird rates running through July 18th. We'd also love to see folks' submissions to be a part of our Training Advisory Committee. Our Training Advisory Committee helps steer the center trainings for the year. That is through our offerings, the topics for our webinars, our learning collaboratives, and virtual symposium, as well as having a hand in the deciding of the focus areas for our national meeting. The applications are open now and will be open through June 6th. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce you today to our presenters, Ahmed Hosni, Assistant Director within the Student Wellness Center at The Ohio State University, and Sarah Anstine, Director of Partnership and Outreach at One Ohio Recovery Foundation. Thank you both for being here with us, and it's my pleasure turning it over to you at this time.
Well, let me get my camera on. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, Anthony. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Ahmed.
So I am going to go ahead and share our slides. Y'all seeing? Wait, nope. This is the part that always gets me. You think I'd have figured this part out by now. Hold on.
We can see your screen though.
You see, yeah,
the slides are coming soon.
One of the 3 screens I have that I think that's the problem, is that it's just too much going on at once. Hold on. Thank you. Just a second. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself a little more while I'm figuring this out, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure do. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Anstine. I am the Director of Partnership and Outreach at the One Ohio Recovery Foundation, which is the statewide nonprofit organization that was created to distribute 55% of Ohio's opioid settlement funds. Prior to my work here at the foundation, I worked at The Ohio State University and at the Higher Education Center. doing recovery work and working with the collegiate recovery community there. But I think the most important thing is that I am an alum of a collegiate recovery program. So I was a student at Texas Tech's program, and can definitely attribute all of my professional success and really everything that's kind of happened in my life to those experiences being a student at the collegiate recovery community there. So excited to be back. Cannot believe it has been 10 years. So honored and thankful to the team there at the Higher Ed Center for thinking about me.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm excited for you to be back as well. And so I was looking through the list of names, and I think it's important to introduce myself as well. I'm the director of recovery at the Higher Education Center. I've been at Ohio State for a little over 10 years, and I came here to Ohio State because I had a friend who had gotten a job here, and that just happened to be you, Sarah, right? And so Sarah started at Ohio State before me, and then invited me to apply for a role within the collegiate recovery program, and the rest is history. And we were friends because we were students at the same collegiate recovery program, and so I have the same sentiment that my life, both personally and professionally, has been transformed by collegiate recovery programs in the best of ways. And so really excited to really have an informal conversation with you today about our experiences professionally within the collegiate recovery space, and then also talk about some of the history of collegiate recovery programs, and maybe what we see happening today. We're in a very rapidly changing national environment for the recovery field in general, and how that might impact collegiate recovery, and thinking about the future a little bit. And so this slide is going to be a little more informal than this presentation is going to be a little more informal than the last one, and probably a little slower paced. I know some of y'all had talked about that, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great conversation. And so these are our learning objectives. These are the things that we're going to talk about, and we'll start with looking at the evolution of CRPs, and talking about how they got to where they are today. And so I thought first it would be important to define what a collegiate recovery program is. I don't want to take for granted the fact that maybe some folks don't know what collegiate recovery programs are, or that they don't have a collegiate recovery program which exists on their campus. And so the definition of collegiate recovery programs by the Association of Recovery in Higher Education is that they are a supportive environment within an institution of higher education, that they reinforce the decision to engage in a lifestyle of recovery from substance use disorder, and they value peer recovery support services as a part of the system of support for students. And so other than that, I don't know if you agree with me or not, Sarah, but oftentimes no two CRPs are really alike, and that they often vary in what types of services they provide and things of that nature as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And some of that plays into where they're housed on campus, the type of school. Is it, commuter campus? So if you've seen one, you've seen one. But there's certainly some themes and trends across them all that allow us to have a common definition.
Yeah, that's right. And so next we have a timeline that I kind of put together of what the recovery field, the collegiate recovery field, has kind of looked like. And so it starts with a few programs being created within a 20-year period. There were 4 collegiate recovery programs which started, and then things start to really speed up after that. And we're going to talk about this all a lot more in depth. But these are some of the high points for the collegiate recovery field. Some associations form. We start to see some national recognition. There's a big movie that comes out, The Anonymous People. We see research start to come out. And Sarah, when we were talking about this presentation, you had called out the fact that transforming youth recovery, or not transforming youth recovery, YPR, Young People in Recovery, also formed in the role that played in young adult recovery in the collegiate recovery field as well.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was like December of 2010, I think was the date where a bunch of us from a number of collegiate recovery programs and recovery high schools were all flown to a national conference in Baltimore. They called it the National Family Dialogue. And so from that, you know, we then had subsequent meetings that SAMHSA brought us all together. But I think we saw a lot of us go from students to professional staff in the collegiate recovery space because of that work. So I know I look at some of this a little bit different. Like sometimes I have the hat on as like I'm a collegiate recovery staff. And so what are the kind of historical moments that influence the field? And then other times I look at this and I think about it in terms of kind of the recovery movement and the people behind the scenes doing this work. So it was kind of fun looking at it from those two lenses. But I think, and we'll talk about it, kind of that evolution of who's working in these programs and doing the advocacy for this stuff, I think has changed a little bit over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I thought talking a lot about the 4 programs, which really made it happen for us all. And one of the interesting things for us is the both being alums of Texas Tech. But these were the first 4 collegiate recovery programs. Brown started in 1977, Rutgers in 1983, Texas Tech in 86, and Augsburg in 97. And so I think one of the things that they had in common was that they all had very visionary leaders who helped to start a collegiate recovery program before there was a definition of a collegiate recovery program. And so one of the interesting things to me is that they went almost 25 years without knowing of each other and not really collaborating and not sharing ideas, but they all were similarly doing the same work on campus to try to support students who are in recovery. And so Dr. Bruce Donovan was the Dean of Chemical Dependency at Brown, and he started their program. Lisa Laitman, who Sarah, you and I both know Lisa very well, and who's a dear mentor and colleague who was the director of the CAPS program at Rutgers for many years, and started a recovery residence hall in 1988, which still exists and has served lots of our friends that we've come to know in the recovery field. Dr. Carl Anderson founded Texas Tech. What I know about that, while I wasn't around when it was founded, is that they the reason it was created was to support the students who were there to become licensed chemical dependency counselors, because they saw that a lot of them were in recovery and they wanted to be intentional about how they supported them. And we both also know Dr. Kitty Harris, who's been a very prominent pioneer in our field, who would come after Dr. Anderson there at Texas Tech as well. And then Patrice Salmeri was the person who helped to start Augsburg. And so all of these people are just pioneers in our field and have done so much for the collegiate recovery field and for any student in any collegiate recovery program at any university in the country probably owes a debt of gratitude to the individuals who started these 4 programs. Another interesting thing is that each of these programs, I know for a fact, ARHE is such a important institution for the field of collegiate recovery. And today, the three of the people who run 3 of these programs are on their executive board, and they continue to be leaders in the recovery space. And so these 4 programs are all still very much relevant and are an important part of the collegiate recovery field today. And so they also had some similarities and some contrasts. First, 2 of them have large residential components. Rutgers and Augsburg have very large residential components, and Brown has recently added a residence hall. And at the time, I'm not sure that it's still the same, but at least 3, if not all 4, required participation in 12-step programs to be a part of the community. And some were housed in counseling centers, some in academic units. But again, interestingly enough, a lot of what they were doing was very similar, but they weren't doing it in coordination with each other because they hadn't met till 2001, I believe it was.
I think something that's interesting about kind of these schools is they're different in and of themselves. We have some large land grant institutions, we have an Ivy League, we have a smaller private school, and to me, that gives me hope that this can work at any kind of school, any size, whether it's more commuter, whether it's, you know, more traditional, like you come and you live on campus, small, large, it's possible everywhere. So that gives me hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they also each had a champion. And oftentimes the collegiate recovery programs that last and sustain are have somebody who's fighting for them and is driven to see success there. And so I think that that's a big part too as well. But yeah, I agree. That's a great point. No, none of these universities are alike. And so the next kind of big things that we saw in our timeline was the development of ARS, which was the Association of Recovery Schools. And at the time, it supported both collegiate recovery programs and recovery high schools, which have for a long time kind of supported one another, the two fields, because the success of one is good for the success of the other. And we still to this day share a conference. While that wasn't always the case, there was a brief time where they didn't, but they are back to having one national conference every year. This year it'll be in New Orleans in June. And they first got together in 2002, and they were supported by the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment to host a convening. And that would be the point in time where we started to see fields emerge for both the recovery schools and the collegiate recovery programs as well. But in 2010, it split into two organizations, ARS and ARHE. And that's where you started to see that they started to grow apart a little bit, but we've seen them now come back together, and they're very supportive of each other and things of that nature. And then we've got Transforming Youth Recovery. I've never had the opportunity to meet Stacy Mathewson myself, but I don't know about you, Sarah, but I'd say that the Transforming Youth Recovery and the work that they did with collegiate recovery programs might be the most pivotal point in the collegiate recovery history as far as the philanthropic efforts that they had and the impact that it's had on our field.
Yeah, I would agree. And while to my knowledge, they're not operating anymore in the way that they used to. I mean, they put out $10,000 seed grants to a bunch of programs. I know we got one in Ohio State, and that almost like put us on the map at the school. Like, what is this program getting a little grant to start something like that? Caught people's attention on campus. So that gave us, I think, a lot of credibility and juice early on when we got started. And then, I mean, they solely provided technical assistance to all of us and helped us map assets. So it was great to see kind of an organization with resources like that come in and really focus on the youth recovery continuum of care. So I know we at Ohio State benefited greatly from the work that they did there, and many others did as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And they actually gave out over 160 seed grants. So that's a big commitment to our field. And without them, I know that lots of the programs which exist today and are supporting students across the country wouldn't exist. And so huge point in time for collegiate recovery programs. And some of the other things that happened early on, which were important, was the publication of a curriculum by Texas Tech University, which was funded by SAMHSA and the Department of Education. And so they called the curriculum the Making an Opportunity on Your Campus, a comprehensive curriculum for designing collegiate recovery communities. And you can still find it on the Texas Tech Collegiate Recovery Program's website. And it's, again, another really pivotal point, maybe the second largest in my opinion, because it started to formalize what recovery supports on a campus could look like or should look like. Some might say, I don't know that that's the case, but definitely could look like. And I know that a lot of some of the really successful programs which would come after it utilized that curriculum and modeled their services after Texas Tech and the work that was being done there.
Ahmed, I don't know if you have memories of being in the center at Tech. Yeah. There was that supply closet there full of the curriculum and lots of other books. And at the time didn't have any appreciation for like, what is all this stuff in here? I do
Yeah.
remember asking if I could take things and they said no. um, only to fast forward, 2 more years and there I am at Ohio State being like, I need to order this curriculum. Like, I didn't know what we had. Like, I didn't know, didn't have an appreciation for it. But
Right.
very vivid memories.
Yeah, and I mean, another weird thing is that we were both on campus as students the year that they had the convening where ARHE started. It
That's
was at
right.
Texas Tech, and
That's
they
right.
they started ARHE. I remember even being asked to speak on a student panel at a conference they're having. I didn't know why. I just knew that the people who support me asked me to show up and talk, and so yeah, definitely. Didn't know what was going on or how important it would be or what role it would take in my life. But yeah, you're right. It was didn't really realize how like who like thinking of seeing Dr. Harris in the halls and things like that. She was just Kitty to me. I didn't really know who she was or why she was so important, you know?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that conference. I also have vivid memories of that, and because it was ARS and ARHE and they launched, and I didn't know like the people that are now my idols that I was like sitting at tables with eating meals. Like, I was just like, oh, I'm gonna volunteer to help at this cool conference. Like, that's how I viewed it. Like, as a student, I was like, what great professional development to be around these people. And I'm grateful that my experience at collegiate recovery created opportunities for me to, rub elbows with these folks that then went on to become my mentors and friends, that people I still talk with today. But oh yeah, I can see sitting in that auditorium, they're up announcing this and the logo and being like, oh, there's something like really big happen here. How do I be a part of it? I'm sure I also was like, how can I get a job there? So it was about time to graduate, but very fond memories of being able to be there. So grateful that Tech hosted so much of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And another thing that I think we can credit to those times was all of the research that we would eventually see, which started to make the case for collegiate recovery programs, and I think also aided in the growth of our field. Right, we exist on college campuses within academia, and so if we don't have some sort of research to show the efficacy of our programs and to show the need of our programs and to make a case or a justification for providing resources to these programs, then it would be difficult for a field to grow or for new programs to start. And so we started to see in the mid 2000s a lot of that research starting to come out, and a lot of it was from Texas Tech, and they had a center that was designed to do research, and that was a part of their mission. And so we see a lot of the early research was supported by the faculty of Texas Tech University as well. I feel like this is turning into a Texas Tech commercial, which is not intended to be, but go Red Raiders. We are Red Raiders after all. So what can I say? And so next, we like thinking about the current state of the field and what it looks like across the country. First, I'd say one of the interesting things that you and I both have a common stake in is that it would be difficult to find a collegiate recovery program in the country that is not doing recovery ally trainings. Wild. Right? Which is wild, right? Because I remember in 2015, you and I sitting here on campus in a big space, wondering how we were going to fill it with more students, and coming up with this idea with the help of a faculty mentor of ours here on campus that we should train recovery allies and that would help us. And then we presented on it at a conference a year later, and now I've gotten requests for people who are doing their dissertation on recovery ally workshops and things of that nature, and it really has become a best practice in the field. And so yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting things is that. And what I think is the most important part about it, and we'll talk about this more later, to me though, is at least for us, what it was is we knew we had a great impact on the small group of students that we're serving that would eventually grow and get bigger, but we were thinking about sustainability and knew that we needed to have a positive impact on the entire campus, and that recovery ally training doesn't just benefit the students we serve, but what we've learned and what we found out here at Ohio State after some years is that Recovery Ally trainings can help to create a culture of care on campus and to help students to understand that it's okay to ask for help and things of that nature. And so I think that's one of the cool things. But since then, other versions have also followed. We're not the only act in town. There are lots of Recovery Ally trainings out there, and schools like VCU, I know the University of Houston, lots of schools created their own Recovery Ally trainings and are willing to share them with schools who were interested in learning about them as well. And then I have the logo of the West Virginia Collegiate Recovery Network, not necessarily to talk about them specifically, but because they have a logo. What I really wanted to talk about was how we've started to see whole coalitions of collegiate recovery programs in states pop up. And West Virginia is a great example of it. North Carolina University System has, I think it's something like 10 to 15 schools within their network of collegiate recovery programs. I know the California system has a network of collegiate recovery programs and is supporting efforts for collegiate recovery system-wide. The state of Virginia, the state of Michigan, Louisiana. And so all of these, where in 2002, just over 20 years ago, we had 4 programs. Now we have states with 3 times that many programs, and they're getting support from their state, from their local government, and things of that nature.
I was going to say that I know some of those states were successful in getting like state opioid response grants to kind of create all of these programs. So as the field emerged and we had the research, we had proof of concept, we had the curriculum, then came the money to be able to really replicate and sustain these programs. So to me, that's when I see that, that's what I think. Like those coalitions were successful in tapping into state and federal funds in a big way.
Yeah, absolutely. And look at that. That's why I put SAMHSA's logo up there, because of the funding that has what I would say has been the golden era for recovery support services, with the amount of funding we've seen from the opioid settlement funds and from the SOAR funding. And so, yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. And we've also seen a lot from other charitable organizations. I know in Michigan, the Jamie Daniels Foundation has been supportive of their collegiate recovery programs across the state. And there are lots of other private foundations which are supporting collegiate recovery. And Sarah, something that you brought up when we were planning our talk was this passing of the torch that we started to see as well. And so we've talked about some of these big names and some of the people who were thought leaders who helped not just in collegiate recovery, but in the recovery field in general. But we've seen a passing of the torch from them to oftentimes what we see is students of collegiate recovery programs and students who benefit from the work that they did. And I know that you had some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that, and some of them are related kind of more to the on the personal side, kind of having been a young, I guess I'm still young. What is mid-30s? What is that? Feels like the best, but also the lost years. Don't fit in any camp. But being a young person in recovery, being super open about your recovery and kind of put into these leadership positions and in the spotlight isn't without its challenges. But then I think from the professional side, we're seeing a workforce emerge. Like I now have a ton of friends all over the country that have done similar work as me. We have more programs. There's more opportunities to do this for that shared learning. But then what does that look like? What is the career ladder? What's next for those young people? So my mind kind of goes in 2 different tracks when I think about that. So don't want to get ahead of the slides, but that's where my head's at.
Yeah. And great. We're going to talk about that for sure. Yep. And so next we're going to talk about emerging challenges and resource gaps in collegiate recovery. And so when we were thinking about how to kind of coin this, and so what this image represents for me is what I feel like due to the opioid overdose crisis, we've seen unparalleled amounts of funding for recovery services than we have in many, many decades. And one of the things that I found interesting when we were talking, Sarah, was this idea that we've had the the spotlight for not for reasons that we want it, but the reality is that the funding has been flowing, and that is soon coming to an end. Whether it's because of things that are happening on a national level now, right? And we're seeing the whispers of agencies like SAMHSA and things of that nature being dissolved and not existing anymore. Or for one of the points that I thought you brought up that I thought was interesting, was the fact that the opioid epidemic is no longer dominating the headlines. And we're starting to see that maybe some of the funding that we hopefully wasn't taken for granted and we didn't think was going to be here forever may not exist. And so what will we do to rise to meet that challenge and to continue seeing growth in our field?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And would love to hear, in the chat thoughts from other states if you're kind of experiencing a similar trend. But what I'm hearing at the local community, because I travel the whole state of Ohio, work with local governments and local communities, there's almost like a fatigue towards the opioid crisis and addiction. We do see headlines that overdose deaths are going down in Ohio, and so people think, hooray, we've solved it. So it's a positive story, but actually the overdose deaths are still astronomically high. We cannot take our foot off the gas, and so there isn't as and even some of those initial leaders and families that were very vocal, they've kind of healed and they've moved on to other things. So I think it's just a different environment now. Whereas when I came to Ohio State and started building our program, I had so much, I was almost more popular off campus because I could just plug into everything that was happening in the local media and in the community around the opioid crisis. And that's how I got exposed to students, referral sources, donors. It set us up for success because we had that narrative. And I don't hear it as much now. So we may have to work a little harder or plug into what is going on while still not having mission drift. And thank you for the reassurance in the chat that I am still young. Just want to acknowledge you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody would have guessed mid-30s, Sarah. Definitely, you're doing great. You're doing great.
Immature still.
Yeah, but absolutely. I agree. I think that I see it today in my work as well. Even on campus, I think that one perfect example was we talked about recovery ally trainings earlier, and oftentimes when we would schedule them, we'd see 50, 60, 70 people show up to a recovery ally training, and we were doing them once a month. And now we could do it once a semester and be really excited to get 15 people. Right. And so I think that that's not to say that this work isn't important, but the focus has shifted. And I think a lot of that too is just for the reasons that you said it is that I think that it can only dominate the news cycle for so long before it becomes normative, right? And I think, unfortunately, we're starting to see a normative effect of the opiate epidemic, and the opiate crisis is just a part of our society, and it feels like less of an emergency possibly than it did before, even though, exactly to your point, the numbers are still sky high, and we're seeing changes in the drug landscape and people overdosing using drugs that weren't opiates, that were laced with opiates, all of these changes that we've seen. But the question that we should be asking ourselves, if we work on a college campus and we want to be doing this work with students in recovery and supporting them, is am I sustainable? And is the program that I'm operating benefiting and relying solely upon state funding and federal funding? And is my university committed to this program for the long term? Or is this something that is run off soft money that isn't going to exist soon? And I think that these are the types of questions that really, really soon we're going to see our colleagues and people who are running collegiate recovery programs across the country forced to answer. And a lot of that is because, again, our national landscape is just changing, and it's going from green and prosperous to back to what it was like before that. I think that that's the most important thing. And I guess my message of hope in this situation would be that we are a field which started as a grassroots field where there wasn't a lot of funding, and it was people and champions who were doing everything they could to bring these services to campus. And I know that AOD professionals know how to get a lot done with a little, and that, you know, while the funding may dry up in a sense, I have hope that we'll still continue to see programs pop up. And so next, I know that you said you wanted to shout out this the PSAT, and so I wanted to put this on here as well. Did you have any thoughts on the PSAT? I know I've used it before, but this was something that you specifically wanted to shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're not familiar, PSAT, Program Sustainability Assessment Tool, go to their website. This is free, Free. It takes, I don't know, 10 minutes. If you really think too hard, but don't think too hard, go with your gut, answer the questions. You can invite others from your team to take it. And there's these 8 frameworks, or it's a framework with these 8 domains that will give you an idea of how sustainable your program is. Because a lot of times we think that it's just the money, but there's actually a whole lot that goes into sustainability. Things like the policy environment you're in, who's championing your cause, do you have leaders involved, who, you know, what are people saying about you in your program when you're not in the room? There were a number of things, the marketing, the communications, are you doing program evaluation? How are you telling your story? And when I saw them present on the PSAT, I was like, wow, I did a lot of these things when we started the program at Ohio State, but I didn't have the words to describe what I was doing. I just knew I needed to get as many people talking about this. I needed to make as many friends with influential people and leaders, both on and off campus, so that everyone knew about this program to the point where it was so loved that Ohio State had no choice but to keep funding it. And then the money came, you know, and now it's institutionalized. We don't have to do all that fundraising that we initially did. So highly recommend this. I actually just did this for another nonprofit board that I'm on to look at how we're doing there. So as resources are changing and shifting, take a look at this. Again, it's free. You'll get a report. But I think as recovery professionals, collegiate recovery professionals, especially if you have to fundraise and really constantly make your case for why this is important and why you're doing what you're doing, lean in here and lean into those areas where maybe you're not as strong, so that we can do all we can to protect this field and these students.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Yeah, I've used it before too. I actually used it in a professional development workshop that I was in, and I was like, it just so happened that I used it like 2 days before you were like, we should talk about the PSAT, and so yeah, I agree. Great tool,
Yep.
and free is the best part of anything. So
Yep.
mm-hmm. And so the next section, I've kind of got us just like, I wanted to ask a couple of rhetorical questions that, or not rhetorical, but just pose a couple questions that we could answer together and have a conversation about. And so the questions are these 3. How do we remain focused on who CRPs are designed to serve? When I think about the future of collegiate recovery programs, I think one of the most important questions for me, as somebody who works and helps to support and run a collegiate recovery program, but has also been very involved at the national level. There's a lot of shifts that we're seeing, not just with collegiate recovery programs, but in the recovery field in general, and even the definition of recovery and what it means to be a person in recovery is no longer the same as it was when I started working here at Ohio State, in that it has shifted and evolved. And so who are CRPs going to serve and who are they designed to serve? And what do we need to know before we expand the scope of our services? And and I think that those are some important questions. How have we integrated into our respective campuses and academia? When we think about sustainability, oftentimes I've provided technical assistance with lots of schools and supported people trying to start collegiate recovery programs. And oftentimes you can see that they have a sense of insecurity about the number of students participating in their collegiate recovery program. And one of the things that I think is imperative for somebody who's working in a collegiate recovery program and is running a collegiate recovery program is, how do you integrate yourself into campus? And how are you showing that your value is more than just the direct contact you have with the students in recovery, but that you are supporting the entire student body as well? And then, are we retaining our thought leaders? And Sarah kind of pointed out earlier as well, as since a lot of these thought leaders that we're seeing in our space are students who have grown up in our collegiate recovery programs, how are we supporting them as professionals and ensuring that they are not being, not for lack of a better term, tokenized, or are being kind of put in the spotlight, and that spotlight isn't too bright and doesn't harm them. So, and so,
so much good stuff here.
Yeah. And so I think that first question, you know, who are we meant to serve? I kind of go back to this research that I know we have talked about lots of times, and that we use it in our Recovery Ally training. And it's because this is some of the, you know, pivotal research which helped to shape our field. And, you know, collegiate recovery programs were designed to do this specifically. They were designed to help students survive a campus social environment which does not feel like it was designed for them, and that it's not created with them in mind, for all of the different reasons that we see. And so I think that that's the first huge question that we the first thing that we need to do is remember what collegiate recovery programs were designed for. They were creating a safe space for students who were choosing not to drink and not to use drugs, right? And they were a space where that they could go and that they could be free of the cheap, readily available access to drugs, and they could find people who they fit in with and develop a sense of belonging, and that they could find people who were like-minded and have the same goals as they did, right? And one of the interesting things that we heard in the last presentation, Sarah, I don't think you were able to be there, but we had a history of alcohol harm reduction over the years.
Interesting.
Yeah, really, really powerful presentation by a great presenter. It was Dr. Kilmer from the University of Washington. Yep. And so the interesting thing about that is and I'll move to the next slide, is that this idea of harm reduction has come up in the recovery space as being a pathway to recovery. So that means I identify that my substance use is problematic, and I am making changes to reduce the harm of my substance use. And we oftentimes hear the dialogue that is recovery. And so any reduction in your substance use means that you're in recovery. And so I'm not here to be controversial to say if that's true or that it's not true, but what I do want to say is that we need to determine whether or not the field of collegiate recovery programs and collegiate recovery was designed to serve those students, or was it designed to serve specifically the students who there was a gap in services for them because there were no abstinence-based spaces and recovery-friendly spaces for them to exist in. And yeah, I think that the importance of knowing the history of harm reduction for me, in the sense of the conversation we're having now, is to recognize that there have been services that support students in their harm reduction pathway on campuses since at least the 80s, right? And while there were some programs of collegiate recovery, we've only seen this field start to mature and to see more than 4 programs exist within the last 10, 20 years. And so what we don't want to do is cause mission drift and to shift away from our focus of creating drug-free, alcohol-free spaces for students who self-identify as being people in recovery, because we're going to lose the essence of what collegiate recovery is if we do that.
No, I completely agree. And I think we're seeing some of this shift happening in all of our recovery spaces and in the recovery community as a whole. And, but not everywhere. And I think depending on where your collegiate recovery program is housed on campus, you may be a part of some of those harm reduction efforts and the health promotion. And college campuses do a ton of harm reduction, health promotion type work, not all just around drug and alcohol use. But I think it's being very clear kind of what you're doing and for whom, and when and where. From a personal standpoint, my parents slept very well at night, knowing they sent me 9 hours away from home to go to a college campus with a collegiate recovery program that was abstinence-based recovery. And that's the peers I would be surrounded by. When I worked at Ohio State, I felt good that I had that confidence talking to a parent on the phone. This is the community your kid is being wrapped up in and surrounded by. And I can't help but think about what we know about addiction and that it is a young person's disease. This is when it starts. The brain is still developing. What a fabulous time for us to be intervening both at high school and at college. So I think, it's an interesting time. And, I look at the history and look at, that mission drift and tenets from 12-step recovery of that singleness of purpose. And that's what attracted me. But I don't think it's an either or. I think these things can all exist on the same campus and sometimes are supported by the same people. But just being clear on these things. Was very helpful. I think sometimes it becomes a bigger argument than it needs to be. And the last thing I'll say is it's quality over quantity. When I sat down with donors and when I sat down with university leaders to justify this program or ask for more money or whatever it may be, I had really incredible data to support the success that we had and could track these students long-term and the outcomes that they were made. And so kind of having some parameters about what it means to be in this program was really helpful in being able to do that. So it's a lot of implications.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the last question, do students pursuing the different pathways still have the same needs, is one we have to answer before we expand our scope of service and who we provide, because to not do that would be irresponsible to those students. And so what we shouldn't do is assume that a student who is pursuing harm reduction has the same goals as a student who's in abstinence-based recovery, has the same needs as a student who's in abstinence-based recovery, or that the things we do to support one of the groups is going to be beneficial for the other group. And so I think that what we can disguise as inclusivity and accepting all pathways into recovery can also create problems when it becomes homogenous and we use a cookie cutter approach to serve everyone. And instead, what we end up doing is not serving anyone very well, if that makes sense. No. And I think also a big question that I've always wondered is, how does adopting the label or identity of being in recovery benefit a student if they're able to successfully moderate their substance use? So if a student pursues a harm reduction pathway and they're successfully moderating their substance use, when you think about society writ large, being a person in recovery comes with stigma. Being a person in recovery is not a class or an identity that is celebrated everywhere you go. I know that as a person in recovery, and as somebody who's now a father, who is now has the positives of my recovery, but a lot of the things that got me to the point where I needed to be in recovery, which are still a part of my history. And I know that a lot of the stigma and those types of things that come with that identity aren't always positive. And so if a student doesn't self-identify as being in recovery, they're just trying to moderate and reduce harm, does it make sense for us to coach them or to help them come to the point where they view themselves as a person in recovery. I don't know. Maybe we should research it, is my thought, as well as how best to serve them. But I agree with you on the point that you made, because even here at Ohio State, I oversee our collegiate recovery program. I also oversee our naloxone dissemination services. I also oversee our fentanyl test strip dissemination services, and I also oversee our BYOB program, which is our harm reduction coaching services, where we meet with students in harm reduction who wanted to reduce harm, and we provide them the coaching to do that. And if those students want to be a part of our collegiate recovery program, they're all welcome, because we don't put parameters on how you join. But what we found is that because there's a really strong abstinence-based focus because of our core group, that those students either fit in or they don't, and they see themselves out. And they're like, this isn't the group that I thought it was going to be. But as a staff, we continue to meet with them individually, serve them, support them in any way that we can, because we serve all students, not just some students at Ohio State. So.
That's right.
And then last is, the last question was, have we professionalized our field, and are we retaining our thought leaders? I want to definitely get to that, because I know that that was an important, we're getting close to where we want to take a few questions, but I know that you had some important thoughts on that. And I agree. I think that one of the things that I've seen with our field is that there's not very many ladders for growth. And so one of the worst things a business can do or a company can do is train people and invest in them for them to leave shortly after. And so if we've got all of these emerging leaders coming from collegiate recovery schools, and we're creating this field that there's no opportunities to grow within, then they're all going to leave. And then we're going to need a new investment into that. When that person leaves, are they even going to fill the old job? And are we going to find somebody who's going to be able to come in and do this really unique job that kind of acts like a social worker or a counselor sometimes, but you also need to be able to fundraise, and you should also understand higher education, right? So this really unicorn of a job. It's an issue we have to address, right? Is we don't want people leaving after 3 years. That would be terrible for our field.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and I think collegiate recovery programs are such a great professional development opportunity and training ground for our students. And so I think as much as we can engage them, because I think we both benefited from all those opportunities. But then when we transition into being staff, I think there's some real challenges there of like, I'm in some instances younger than the students were, or they were my peer. So I'm very protective of the staff, the young staff running these programs, because it is your peer group. You very much have to put yourself out there a lot. And I think we've seen a lot of folks either kind of burn out, and some of them very publicly, after having just their whole professional identity being in recovery and attached to some kind of program where that hasn't gone well. Or we see folks kind of go the other end, and they're like, I don't want to be in the field at all. I would like to think I'm navigating the middle ground in there, but we have to have career ladders and things for folks to move into. And if you're on this call and you maybe oversee someone that runs the collegiate recovery program or have a bigger purview, like think about what other professional development opportunities or expanded scope of work to help us get other opportunities to maybe grow. But you're absolutely right, Ahmed. We want to do that, but not risk the dedicated staff to these programs, because I believe very strongly, based on my experience and when I look at the field, if you don't have a dedicated staff person for the collegiate recovery program, they struggle a lot more. And a lot aren't successful. So I think thinking through a career ladder, protecting our young people that are in these roles, that kind of just graduated and came up through them. But also I have found that my experience working at one of these programs was incredibly transferable. I've since left, I've done state policy, community relations for a pharmaceutical company, work at a foundation now. Like, I've been able to leverage all that I did at a collegiate recovery program into so many other things. So I think also viewing that lens too, like what are these transferable skills and assets, especially if you really lean into, you know, the partnership building and some of the off-campus stuff. It's very transferable, because you're really kind of starting a whole program on campus from the ground up, which is pretty cool to be able to do. And the other thought I had when I was thinking about this, and Ahmed, I think you're on the board of some of these associations, like we need some like alumni involvement, like form some advisory committees, like why aren't we putting them on some of these boards and things to not lose that perspective? Because there's, you know, we're a little bit removed now, but we still care very much and have some knowledge. So I think I would give feedback back to the field as a whole. How are they retaining past staff?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to call out, that was great, Sarah, because we're short on time, is that they're actually doing a collegiate recovery workforce study. And so if you are working in collegiate recovery and you haven't participated, you could help ARHE by participating in the study. And maybe this is the research we need to better understand and support our collegiate recovery workforce. And so that gives us about 5 minutes. Anthony, if we had any questions that people were asking of us?
Yeah, we did have a question come in. It says, my campus used to have an active collegiate recovery community that became inactive after COVID. Do you all have any recommendations for first steps to reevaluating, bringing it back, or how to start a new program?
Oh man. Well, I think my first thing would be you have an opportunity to do something different. So I'd evaluate if what you had before was working, while knowing that probably things on campus are different today than they were then. But I would seize that as an opportunity. Make changes that you want to make, and find that champion to lead it. Because I also think, you know, what happened that it became inactive? You know, maybe there wasn't the champions, maybe there wasn't the student involvement and support that we thought. So I'd do a lot of reflection first, to learn and grow, and then get excited about an opportunity to kind of have a do-over.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think I would start there. And I just want to also honor that what a difficult time that was to be serving college students, and especially such an at-risk population of people who were potentially in early recovery, who are being isolated and separated from their peers. And it was a difficult time. And so, but I think that Sarah's advice is great advice, is to you know, start from the beginning and reassess and make a plan for moving forward. And also, when you're looking back, also how were you successful in getting it to start the first time around? What was what got you the institutional support to start it in the beginning, and what has changed that in those leaders' minds now that they don't think it's needed anymore, because at one point clearly they did.
Yeah, and it's probably not as well known, but Ohio State had an effort start and then fizzle out.
Right.
And they had a grad student doing their field placement as the program, and they graduated and the whole thing fell apart. So it was very much based around one person. So I would also say, you know, I think many of us have experienced that. So there's hope that you can get it going again.
Thank you. We have a time for about one more question. This person said that they love the idea of alumni involvement. Do you have any insight on creating that relationship or buy-in?
Yeah, I think first is the most difficult part is staying in contact with your alumni. And so one of the things that we do to stay in contact with our alumni is we find reasons to bring them back to campus, and we invite them back to campus, and we try to maintain our relationship with them. And so things that we've had them do is like help chair our is they actually help to chair our anniversary celebration, and they were the faces in the front, the spokespeople of that, and creating newsletters to send to them and to provide them with information and updates about what's happening in the collegiate recovery program, because one of the things that universities know and have done for a long time is that your alumni become your best supporters. And so when things start to go awry, it's oftentimes your alumni who are going to support you, and they also become your donor base at some point potentially as well. And so I would say keeping them in contact, keeping a list of contacts, first knowing how to stay in contact with them, and then identifying ways to share information with them, share success stories with them, and to find reasons to bring them back to campus.
And as an alum and someone not working in the program anymore, what I think I would enjoy, and I know is happening, like the sober tailgates, calling all the alums back, like knowing we're all going to have a meetup together. And then I think if, mentorship opportunities with alums and current students, and then regional meetups. Like I moved out of Columbus. I live somewhere else in Ohio now. Like, who are the other CRC alums up here that we could start getting together? So I think there's a lot of great opportunity there, and you're exactly right, Ahmed. The alums are your future donors, supporters, champions.
Yeah.
Well, thank you,
Anthony.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just before we go, I just want to thank Sarah I asked you to come back and for doing this, and just say that we couldn't celebrate the center without bringing you back. And so I'm really grateful that you were here, and for all that you've done for collegiate recovery at Ohio State and for the center. And, the center wouldn't include recovery in it today if you weren't here at Ohio State when it came back. And so just grateful for you and all you've done for the center.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and appreciate y'all continuing to steward all this great work. Love seeing it continue.
I echo everything that Ahmed shared, and a big thank you to you, Ahmed. I do just have a closing slide, just reminding folks that the final session for today will be taking place at 3:30 to 4:30. It is titled Empowering the Future, Insight and Impact in Campus Health and Wellness. It will be a panel format with Dr. Dolores Cimini, Joan Masters, and Dr. Allison Smith, and will be moderated by our very own Logan Davis. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we hope to see you at our closing session. Take care, all.